Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve podcast. Today's guest is the founder of Satori. Welcome to the show. How you doing? It's Jordan Miller.
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm glad to have you here, man. I'm excited to get into this because, as I just mentioned off camera, like I've done a lot of shows on AI on my Patreon, patreon.com/Christian Reeve. Go subscribe. Uh, and I've appeared on other people's shows to talk about AI. Most recently, I did a show about cashless society, which touched on that. But then the topic preceding that was more exclusively about AI. So I mean, it's one of those topics where whether you like it or not, it's here to stay, and it's going to change and is changing the way that we live in various different ways. And I had to really sit down and research this, and I'm still trying to understand. So,
Yeah,
you're the founder of Satori, which offers distributed AI. Could you sort of explain, maybe in layman's terms, what distributed AI is for our listeners?
sure. AI right now is not very distributed. Intelligence isn't very distributed. So, centralized companies make the big models. They control the big models. They train the big models. Um, they get all the benefit of the big models. And and having that kind of control is probably not the best way forward, I don't think. One good thing is that the market is a natural decentralizer. So there's competitors. So they have to compete with each other. That's good. But I think we can take it a step further and we can say, well, if you want to, you can run this program on your machine and it will help the AI. But it's a distributed network. Anybody can run it and anybody can control it. You can change how it runs on your computer. You can also vote on how it should run overall. So we want to decentralize the control so that it's distributed into as many hands as possible.
Okay. I agree with the sentiment there. I think that's always important to kind of give access to any and all. But at the same time, do you not think that maybe it's possibly going to be less likely for the major corporations and companies to take this on, given that it can't given that it's available to any and all? Because I've read the same thing about like cryptocurrencies and how major investors and traders are unwilling to invest in that because it's not secure, because anyone can like access it and stuff like that. Like, could you speak to that?
Sure, like the big companies taking it on, we actually kind of see us as a competitor to the big companies, saying like if you're somebody who uh, uh, kind of feels that same sentiment, is in that same kind of mode. If you want to have a say, you can just run this node and participate in the network. And you could still use the big companies, you could still go that way, but it's not as if we kind of need their permission or need their involvement. So we just kind of are doing our own thing on our own project.
This is what I mean though. Like, in order for like these projects to like fully take off, like in society, and you know where I'm going with this. Like, you need
Yes,
that
yes.
investment from those bigger companies,
Investment.
and if they won't touch it, it makes it hard. Not impossible, but it
Sure.
makes it harder. Like, obviously, we've established over the years with various different business endeavors that you can do things through, say, crowdfunding or sourcing finances from other places, but it takes a lot longer to do it in that way.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's a lot of things that we can achieve with this technology, that are positive things. I mean, as my listeners will know, I have my reservations about AI, and mostly from the kind of how it's going to take jobs and stuff like that. But I do think that AI has a lot of positive applications, more so to do what. But my personal opinion is, once it kind of is tied with robotics and robotics kind of catches up, that's when we're going to really see the benefits of AI. Because right now it's just attacking the arts and everything, and it's like no. So for people like me, it's like death nail in my future. But in general, if we just look at the possibilities, I mean, it's huge. I can say from a business perspective, when I did work in marketing, I was beginning to see the beginnings of that through, for instance, analytics. It made so much more sense to let AI take over that and then have like real time analytics that update like that in seconds as opposed to like
Yes.
manually looking for this stuff. I mean, you save so much time. You pull up this data, you've got it. Now you can focus your time on making decisions, decision making, and actually making moves as opposed to actually just trying to make like trying to get data and data collection. It's really opened up doors there. But
Yeah, that analytics, that's kind of where I came from. I was
oh,
in
cool.
business intelligence. And so that's kind of my background. And that's, there are different types of AI. And so that is the type that we're focused on, is the analytics type, not the language type yet. We'll have a language element at the end, but the analytics. And so since we're focused on the future, we're trying to figure out, or the network is trying to figure out what the future is going to be by analyzing all the data. And and right now that just looks like raw numbers. It'll analyze, prices, and it'll analyze, sentiment and whatever else might be important. And then it'll spit out the future prediction of all of those raw numbers. And that's kind of the foundation of Satori.
How do you think distributed AI in general could help society, particularly like startups and businesses and maybe even just like the general public? Like, how exactly is a distributed AI going to help people as opposed to just not doing it that way?
Well, I think particularly distributing the prediction of the future is probably the most important thing to get distributed. That's kind of my premise. Because, we have we have we have had history and we've had news, right? And news is just recent history. So and what we decided is that, maybe the government shouldn't be in charge of the news, and so freedom of the press and all that. And so we realized it's kind of important not to have any one voice that's dominating the whole thing. A long time ago, we figured that out. And what we haven't, I don't think we've realized is that that's a double-edged sword. There's another side of that equation, and that's the future. What if you had a voice that was dominant and really good at predicting the future, and it had all the power? Then whatever it says will become the future because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because people believe it, then it becomes true. So, if you have that kind of situation, you want it to be decentralized from the beginning as much as possible.
You're always going to have someone in control of such a system, though. And as you just put it in those words, if that one system has that power and there is one entity, one country, one nation, whatever, one group of people controlling that, they control everything. The
The narrative.
future, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that begin. So to use a cliche, but that begins to paint a sort of a dystopian kind of 1984 style scenario where you're telling people what the future is, or like I get what you're saying in so much as like you could predict what's going to happen, and you probably be pretty accurate based on current trends and how things are going, et cetera, et cetera. But like with the way that news exists right now,
yeah,
it already paints a narrative anyway, as you said, because it's owned by certain outlets, political affiliations, etc. So
that's right.
I I understand where you're coming from the perspective of like, oh, let's have an entity that is not affiliated with anyone or anything, so you get raw information that is factual, but you've got to have someone in control of this, and whoever is in control is inevitably going to put their influence into it.
That's right.
It's just human nature.
There's always going to be a hierarchy of power. right?
Right.
That's kind of, yeah. Um,
So yeah, I know it's like really depressing like mindset to have. Like I try to be positive with these things and see the positives, but with something like that, I don't know. I mean, maybe that speaks to the point of what we're talking about though. Why it should always be, you know, controlled by many, 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 and there's no single owner of said technology.
right. That's the goal, right? And
Right.
so even though it's kind of like, even though this hierarchy of power naturally occurs, you always want to be pushing back um, in order to keep it as decentralized as possible. So yeah, you'll never be able to achieve true decentralization forever. Like that's just impossible. But on the other end of the spectrum, no single entity will be able to maintain their power forever. So it kind of goes both ways. And so we just want to push it towards that end of the spectrum constantly as much as we can. And that's kind of where the blockchain aspect of the whole system comes in. Like I mentioned, you can run it on your own computer, you can change the algorithms, you can change your computer's output, how it works, and and the network is like, okay, that's your prediction. Thank you. So you have like direct control over your voice on the network, but you also have control over the network at large with the blockchain token that's produced. So for anybody who's running this, they get a token, and that token can be used to vote on what should be predicted. What's a valuable data stream in the world that the system should look at and predict? Because there's a lot of data streams and there's too many to watch. And some of them are bad data and some of them are fraudulent. And, so we need a mechanism to say, these are the data streams that we as humans who hold the token, who have the unit of control, care about. So, predict our inflation rate, predict our, demographic changes, predict us, predict understanding what's going on in our world, rather than, I don't know, some thing that just doesn't matter. So, uh, that's kind of the unit of control is if you can get the token out to people, then they can use that to vote.
Big problem though that we're having with AI right now, and granted it is learning and developing at a rapid rate, but the issue is how much incorrect data it pulls up or how it will begin to start sputting out nonsense because it's taking information from the internet, piecing it together, etc. Like we've seen some hilarious stuff with like variations of Chat GPT, for example, which I know is such a like rudimentary example, but like it does kind of illustrate the key issues and the kind of inevitability of like when you take all this information and then you don't prompt it in the right way. Like it has to be prompted like almost perfectly to get the results that you're looking for, right? So like let's look at that for a second. Like like for instance, how are companies like yours aiming to like filter out the inaccuracies of information so that the AI is actually pulling correct data?
That's a really good question. So I think we should take a step back even from that and say, what kind of data are these other AI systems right now being trained on? And all the large language models, like you mentioned, they're being trained on language. So they're being trained
Sure.
on our perception of the world because that's our language. So we see the world, it filters through us, we produce language, the AIs get trained on that. And this is okay, but we have to realize that that doesn't mean it's being trained on the real world. It's not seeing the real world. It's seeing our perspective of the real world. And not just our perspective, like individually or anything. It's seeing our groupthink, our most, um, I don't know, I don't know, the party line. It's seeing, our lowest common denominator view of what the world is. So, in some situations, it's just inaccurate. because it's reflecting our misunderstanding of the world back to us. And so I think that's kind of important to understand is that, if you have a system like Satori, it can ingest language. Well, not quite yet. We just launched, but it only ingests numbers right now. But it could ingest our language, but what we're pointing it at is the real world. So we're pointing it at metrics of ocean temperatures and prices and things that are happening in the world. And so we're not trying to filter it through us because we're not making a language model. We're making a future predicting model. And I think that's kind of important that this system is in communication directly with the real world. I mean, as far as the measurements go. Uh, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, but I love this because it just brings like
Yeah,
50 other questions. Like that's kind of perfect in the sense that okay, it's only focusing on numbers, which is what we wanted to do. Because if anything, if it takes the range of opinions online, I mean, it's pardon my language, but like humans are often full of shit. And they
right.
will say anything, and
Yeah,
obviously an AI model can't tell the difference. So it just
right,
takes. I guess it's like works on the prediction model basis. It says like, okay, 70% of people are saying this, therefore that must be the right answer. Whereas like
right.
if you have statistics, numbers, whatever, it's like it's just numbers, but that's the basis of everything. As we know, mathematics forms the basis of everything. So it's as much as I hate to say that I'm terrible at maths, but I can't deny that. Like it really is the building blocks of everything in the world. And when you break it down for AI, that's how it's going to predict, yeah, the next 5 years. Say like weather patterns, as you mentioned, like that's how it will able to
Yeah,
do that. Is
like,
but but again though, it's pulling. It depends on the information being given to it. Like
yes.
you know what I'm saying. Like if you, I think the only way you could really, and again, what the hell do I know? But like on a simple, let's say you hand over weather predictions to an AI system, right? So you'd have to somehow give it access to all, like one weather prediction services system, and give it like historical records, and then just raw data, I guess. But you'd always receive information from humans, though. This is the thing, and we have human error, so we'd have to account for that. So I guess
That's
it
right.
could only ever really have like a 97, 98% success rate really on that basis.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah, it'll never be perfect. And
Sure.
it'll never get all the black swans that, are going to come our way. It will make bad predictions sometimes, but I think it can do better than we can do.
Oh,
And so that's
100%.
kind of the goal. Yeah.
What are some other ways that distributed AI is being used in the real world, and how is it helping people?
There's other projects that are kind of combining blockchain technology with AI. Um, I'm sure there's lots of little projects like this one that are just beginning, but there's some big ones that have been around for several years. Uh, One of the coolest, I think, is BitTensor. So BitTensor allows you to make a large model on a distributed system, but it doesn't specify any type of model. It kind of says you can make any kind of model. So um, that's cool. It's a cool system. Uh, let's see, what else? A lot of the earlier combinations of blockchain and AI um, were just kind of experiments to see like, okay, this is a cool thing. People, blockchain's new, it's cool. AI's, being developed and this is like years ago, many years ago. And so it felt like to me that there were some companies that started out and they didn't really have a good design and like it's not going to scale, it's not going to really work. But they said we can combine it by just saying we'll make a blockchain that can be used as a marketplace. And then anybody can come on and build AI algorithms and kind of just have a marketplace of AI algorithms. And so that was kind of the first wave of the combination of the two. I mean, which is better than nothing, but I think it has many problems because it requires a lot of human labor, and all this human labor is basically unpaid unless they happen to build something that's really useful that people buy. And
This is what I
so,
mean. It's like that was the first thing that came to mind is, oh, well, who's funding these projects? But then it's like, well, I guess it would be depending on the project, it would be either free or it would be there would be a business interest. But then if there is a business interest,
well,
that changes everything, really, doesn't it? Like,
right. Yeah, and back in those days, it was, and I guess there's still hype today, but back in
mhm.
those days, it was all just funded by hype. It was just people were like, "Oh, this is awesome," and then they, they buy into it. So I think there's a lot of hype. I don't love hype around technologies and Bitcoin and blockchain and AI. I think it gets in the way, but it has a necessary place. Um,
Well, I think like it's use cases, isn't it? That's always the key factor. Like we've
yeah.
established that, like with say cryptocurrency, that it's an alternative to regular currency, obviously, but it's like this idea that everything could be digitized, which again, I covered the problems with that and the idea of a cashless society in my latest Patreon episode. So make sure you go check that out. But one thing I kind of established on the other side, the more positive side, is the ease of use with such a system, how quick it could be. Um, the fact that, like there's different ways to accumulate, say, crypto versus, traditional means of earning income, I suppose. And as you mentioned, tokens equate to like almost like voting power. It's not dissimilar to being, I guess, on like a board of directors for a company. But like, how would one attain more voting power with such a thing? Would you have to be like one of the key leaders or designers of said technology, or like how does that work?
The voting power is we're trying to distribute it as evenly as possible so that those that are running the Satori neuron on their machines um, receive the token as a reward. So the work that the machine is doing is earning the token. Um, and that way, if a lot of people are running it, then it can be earned by a lot of people and could be decentralized and distributed. So that's kind of the goal.
How integral do you think distributed AI is to our future? It's difficult to attach this to any one given thing, but let's just look at it in general in society. Like how integral is it?
Um, I think the further into the future you look, the more decentralized AI will become. Uh, because if you look at our brains, and I kind of see our brains as kind of probably near the pinnacle of what uh, intelligence technology can evolve into, right? Does that
Interesting.
kind of make sense? So I kind of see our brains as a foreshadowing of what AI will be in hundreds or thousands of years, right? So, and what we have is a distributed system in our brain because it's just a bunch of neurons. It's just one big network, right? And there's no person in charge of this network. They all kind of work together. And so we have a distributed system and it comes to consensus, and we know it comes to consensus because we have a singular experience of the world. We got like trillions of neurons, but we don't have trillions of views of the world. We have one. So we know it comes to consensus. And so what we have is a distributed intelligence in our head, right? I mean, so that's what we got. And so I think we're going to see more and more intersections between distributed technology or decentralized technology and AI as these two technologies develop.
Okay, I'm gonna play scientist versus philosopher for a second. Could you not say that like the brain is not the epicenter of or like operating a centralized network somewhat? Like, because it's obviously giving out orders to the rest of the body.
Oh, yeah.
You could maybe
Yeah.
argue that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Look at
Yeah,
me out of my
totally.
depth trying to ask
In
intelligent
fact,
questions.
I think that's a really good point because this pattern of decentralization and centralization is actually a pattern we see. Like, I haven't really put it in those words because I've thought about it more in terms of information.
Okay.
So I've thought about it in terms of information being compressed and then expanded back out. And this happens again and again in our brain. So,
A
like,
bit
we'll
like
take
when you take like a zip folder, you compress it down and then you extract it. It's a bit like that.
just like that. So, like your eyes, I don't remember how many neurons are on the back of your fovea, your eye, but it's a lot, I mean, thousands, tens of thousands, hundred, I don't know. I have no idea. I forgot, but it's a lot. And then as, they get activated and then they kind of connect into each other, right? So they're making their way towards the brain. Um, and they, go through little ganglias or whatever. But at some point, it gets contracted all the way down to the point where there's like a grid of like 40 neurons that represent your eye, the data that's coming from your eye. So we have thousands of neurons being activated, and all that information gets filtered down to 40 neurons being activated. And then that's, right before it enters your brain, and then it expands back out and goes into your visual cortex and whatever. And so your brain is recreating the, it's actually trying to simulate the activation of those thousands of neurons given only those 40 neurons. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
And so it's pretty wild. But this happens, this is just an example. This happens again and again. It happens everywhere. In fact, we could look at the two hemispheres of your brain. Data comes in kind of at the outside of your brain, your neocortex on the edge, on the periphery, and it comes in and it makes its way to the middle where there's this superhighway of neurons, right, that reach across to the other hemisphere. And though that bundle of neurons, that's far fewer than the number of neurons that are receiving data, raw data from your fingers and eyes and stuff. So that means all that data of your senses, your sensation is getting compressed before it enters the other side of your brain and then expands back out. And so we see this compression and decompression everywhere in the brain. And a lot of our AI algorithms kind of mirror that pattern as well. A lot of this stuff has been built in a pattern. I'm just trying to remember the name. Autoencoder with yeah. And so that's what an autoencoder kind of is. It has large amounts of data coming in, filters it down to a small amount of neurons in the center, and then expands it back out. So we've kind of discovered that that pattern is very useful in AI, but we haven't figured out how to use it in the most efficient way.
How will quantum computing affect distributed AI?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
I respect it, man. I respect it. Yeah. Whenever I don't know something, I'm like, you know what? I don't know. Yeah, more people need to exercise that. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, isn't it? Like we've heard sliverings about what it could be, but there's
Yeah,
nothing concrete that's been presented just yet. So it is just like a mythical
yeah,
future thing
right.
at this point.
And I don't know much about quantum computing technology like at all. Um, and I'll talk to people like I don't know much about lots of technologies, right? I mean, I've kind of got my head down in one or two, right? But I'll talk to people and they might not know the limitations of a technology that I understand or understand a little bit better, perhaps. And so they'll make assumptions that things can happen where I'll be like, well, that's extraordinarily hard to do, but I can see why you would think it's pretty easy. So, so I feel like I would be in the same boat with quantum computing. I'd be like, oh, well, I better could do this. And then somebody who knows more would be like, no.
Sorry, mate.
Yeah.
Not happening. How can you keep data private and provide security within distributed AI networks?
Our system is mostly public. So
So it'd be
that's
less
the
secure.
that's the way it's built right now. So what we're trying to do is build a network that you can publish public data, and then it will be predicted. And then the predictions of those of your data stream will be public. And we're calling that the public good. And so this should be used for prices. It should be used for environment data, government statistics. It should be used for anything that's meant to be public, right? It's a public good. After we get done scaling that and we finish with that, um, that's kind of our foundation. But after that, we can add in the ability for people to add private data. So, for instance, if you're running this on your own machine, whether you're a company or you're an individual, you might want to be able to route some data to the machine that doesn't get broadcast out. And so we'll implement that eventually. But the good thing about that is your machine can still listen to all the public data. So it can take the public information, take your private information, and give you a prediction that is a correlation of the two, right? So it can like de-silo your information and then get better insights, make a better prediction, and give that to you. So that's kind of the goal. And that's the easiest thing to do is to just say, well, you run it on your hardware and then it's private. No big deal. The paradigm is not to do that. It's to run it on some cloud provider and then you have a problem. But it's, I mean, that's the way the economics pushes it. So that's why it's the paradigm. But it doesn't have to be what everybody does all the time. So I think it would be a good idea to run these things on-prem and just keep your data private that way.
Do you not think though that if you start implementing these things, particularly a public, as you call it, like network, does that not just open you up to hackers and everything? Like, how can you even attempt to protect something like that?
Well, what do you mean by protect?
Well, like I said, you've got hackers out there. You've got people successfully taking down companies. Even I
Right.
see it with big
Right.
banks and stuff. Like so, in a way, I mean, again, maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, but wouldn't it be like child's play hacking into a system like this?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a decentralized system uh, as a whole is kind of resilient against a certain kind of attack, like DDoS attack, where they're just trying to take down the network. So
Okay.
it's kind of resilient because it has a lot of bandwidth, and if you can take down a node easy, no problem. Be like, we're all going to attack that node, and then it's going to get overwhelmed, and then it's going to shut down, and it's not on the network anymore. So you could do that. Um, but as far as taking down the whole network, then it can just come back up. And so DDoS, it's hard to do that against a decentralized network. Um,
Hmm, okay.
there's other, I mean, what it kind of sounds like is that most attackers are not just trying to bring it down, but trying to like get some
The
sensitive information, right?
right,
And
right, right,
so
right.
if this public data doesn't really have any sensitive information, it's kind of like, well, um, it's all public, so go ahead, you can have it.
But, but by the same logic, if they would target that private network or that private aspect of that network, would it not be easier, as you said, because when you're targeting one source, you're likely to be more successful.
Yes, yes, but it's got lots of nodes. And so when they take one down, another one can just come up. And then when they focus on that one, you know, so it's got
Oh,
some resilience, but it
do
doesn't mean it's perfect.
do you think you could like in theory hand over the protection of the security network to AI to get it to function in that manner, to like just endlessly put up new nodes, put up new defense mechanisms and such?
Yeah, yeah, I think you could.
Would it be
But
wise, do you think, to do that? Or no?
uh, I think it would as long as you maintain control of the AI. Yeah.
Sure. So you'd always have to have. Well, I guess this is what I'm learning about AI in general as well, is that you always have to have people overseeing or prompting or whatever. And I guess that, in essence, will be the function of the human being as it pertains to AI and AI related jobs, maybe as we
I
move
I
forward.
think I think so. I kind of when I discovered blockchain technology and saw this new trend and what was possible with it, I kind of realized that okay, if you extrapolate this out to the future, computers are going to be doing most of the labor on the earth eventually. And to direct that labor, they're not going to really interact with the current banking system. They're going to interact with blockchains or any kind of decentralized digital money, really. Any digital money they'll interact with. So when I first saw these currencies like blockchain and Ethereum, I was like, oh, so this is a share or could represent a share of future computerized labor. And so um, I kind of felt like that relates to your question. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
that's what it
absolutely.
is.
It's just fascinating thinking about how this could be applied to everyday life. And as you mentioned there, like it seems to me like the old technologies will have to at some point just accept that they need to move over to this. Like using the bank as an example, they're going to have to adopt blockchain technology eventually. I mean, I don't see any
Right.
other way around it. Like, especially if the rumors are true that they want to go to a cashless society, that's how you do it.
Right.
But
And
I don't
that's
know
this.
how the that would work. Like, let's say you take like I don't know HSBC and they're trying to move their system over to that. I mean, that sounds like a huge undertaking.
Well, I think what they would do, banks are more largely, as far and large corporations, I see them as largely an extension of the government. And so, well, what I think will happen, and is seems like it's happening, although I don't follow it very closely, but that they're trying to make a digital currency that the government's in control of and push that as the new dollar or the new, currency or something. And it kind of seems like that's what's eventually inevitable, which is obviously in their best
Sucks.
interest, right? Like just
Yeah.
go for it. But yeah, so I don't want to use that when that world happens. I'd rather not. So I hope there's going to be alternatives that they don't squash.
Well, this is something I covered actually in my cashless society show. What I'd said, amongst other things, go check it out, patreon.com/Christian Reeve. That's the second or third time I've said that now. um, you're going to always have alternatives to whatever the
Yeah,
main system is.
yeah,
That's what cryptocurrency is, an alternative to the system.
that's right.
And what we've seen is people interact with it how they wish to interact with it, which government and the rest of the world don't like. Why? Because it's individual trading. You can't tax it. You can't really gain control of it. And I don't think you can really make it illegal. I mean, I think they're trying to, but you can't. You just can't. I mean, it's the same as like if me and you stand outside our house and we're like, I will trade you this car for I don't know packet of M&Ms. Like it's stupid, but there's no one that can stop us doing that.
Right.
unless you start bringing in
Yes.
like, really intense laws. But then that sort of stuff like that, it's an uprising, isn't it? And that's a whole conversation for another day. But we're talking about specifically the worth of things and currencies. And my point, I guess, with all of this is that, especially when you take technologies like this, distributed AIs, blockchain technology, everything in between, it gives the power to the people to do their own projects, their own things. And so you're going to have more collaboration, you're going to have more individual projects being set up, maybe even more types of currencies. I think we're going to see more currencies develop or more or different ways. I think we're going to see more trading, I guess, is what I'm trying to allude to as we move forward. And
Yeah.
and maybe I don't know systems like yours at Satori might be able to facilitate such things. A marketplace
Yeah.
of sorts.
Yeah. I hope we're going to see more innovation, more experiments. Um, it kind of seems like when we get new technology, everybody can kind of see how awesome it could be, but then it's difficult, really difficult to make awesome stuff. So people kind of tend towards, oh, let's just go make a meme coin.
Well,
And
see, even something like that. Like I know it's just a big joke, but like, what have we learned from MemeCon? Well, we've learned that we can get a lot of people together to basically fuck up the markets if we wish.
yeah,
Do you know
that's
what I mean?
right.
Well, we can do that.
Yeah.
We can immediately inflate and deflate a coin. I know those are the official terms, but you know what I mean. Bullish,
Yeah.
I think they call it, or bearish. Point is, you can sway a lot in society with that. And that, I think, is particularly the thing that the governments and the investors are looking at is how you get a big, massive upsurgence in trading and stuff. Because it's like, okay,
Right.
if you can do that, what else can you achieve with
Right.
that level of power? You know,
Because they would like that power. They
sure,
want the control. Yeah. It
right.
represents
But
the
I don't
lack of
think
their control.
Right, but I don't think you can really control that. I mean, I know it's a bit out of date, but that whole fiasco with GameStop years ago proved perfectly that like when people want to do something that goes against the wishes of the major companies, they can do it. And that's the kind of the scary element to it, isn't it? It's like power to the people, which I'm all for. But I don't know. It's just interesting how the government is trying and failing.
Yeah.
They can't really control it, and that almost baffles my mind. But it's true because it's like the freedom is already there. Like I'm surprised that, and this is another reason why it baffles me that you're able, for instance, to do work like you're doing now, and governments haven't tried to intervene because it's like maybe they won't be in charge in the future.
Yeah.
I'd
Maybe.
take it
Maybe
to the
not.
extreme, but like
Yeah.
that's the reality, isn't it? Like if you have a distributed network across the entire world and everyone has interaction with that or the ability to control that to some extent, you have power to
You
some
know,
extent.
uh, the Adam and Eve story, I like that story a lot because I think it talks a lot about language, um, in kind of a symbolic way, right? I mean, you've got Adam, you've got Eve, and you've got the God and devil, and they're all using language in different ways. And I think one thing that's really important that it kind of displays is that, okay, you've got this naive Adam, and he's in the garden and he's kind of looking around and like, what's going on? And so he's using language to categorize his world and understand what's going on, right? He's mapping out the world with language. He's like naming the animals and stuff like that, right? And then you've got the devil. Well, first of all, you've got Eve, who like isn't doing that. She's just kind of one with the world. She's just kind of going with the flow and not needing to categorize everything. And then you've got the devil, who is he already knows what's going on, right? He's not naive, and so he comes in into the scene and he uses language to change the world. He uses language to manipulate. First, he tries to manipulate Adam, then he manipulates Eve. So he tries to use language to change what the world is. And so I kind of think that, in kind of a roundabout way, right? And so I kind of think those are the two ways that it kind of highlights that those are the two ways you can use language. You can use it to organize your own understanding, and you can use it to change the understanding of others and thereby change their behavior and thereby, change the world. And so when I look at governments and big corporations and propaganda and even what gets solidified in these large language models, and I see all the groupthink, I see the world as largely competing forms of language that are always that are all trying to grapple for control at all times because uh, it doesn't seem like they're trying to model, they're trying to make the world be what they want it to be. So yeah.
Amazing stuff. Thank you so much for sharing, man.
Yeah.
What would you say are the biggest challenges with distributed AI?
Oh, the biggest challenge is actually making it.
Yeah.
It's very hard to make.
Yeah, like I said, there's quite a few times throughout the conversation where you've been like, it's really difficult. It's a lot of work. And I'm like, I feel you, buddy. That's a lot.
So yeah, I mean, I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge.
I mean, how many people have you got, say, working on Satori? Like, just this as an
So
example.
we just launched and we're very early days and um, so very early. So let me count it up. We've got two people working on the AI engine. Um, I kind of built a prototypical AI engine that we could launch with, but it doesn't work very well. And so now we have some real professionals that are coming in and making it more accurate. Okay, so we've got that. We've
These pe
probably got about, what's
these
that?
people that you've brought in, are they like consultants or are they like what's their input
Yeah,
exactly?
consultants at this point. I guess you could put it that way. What it technically is, like legal jargon, um, is we've issued them a grant. We've
Hmm.
said, hey, just work on this. And you have basically, you can do whatever you want, but you know the structure of how it needs to conform, but just go for it. So since we're in early days, we can do that. Once we kind of establish um, all of our structures more deeply, we'll probably need to kind of manage everything more closely. But early days, it's very kind of whatever. So, and then we have a few other people working with me on the infrastructure and getting that better and better every day. So we're a very small team. That's about it. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to switch things up and we'll put a bow on distributed AI for now. Actually, one more question with
Yeah,
distributed AI. One more.
sure.
So I always freestyle this question. Well, I say freestyle. I always change this question for every single guest. I'll be intrigued to see your answer to this. What has distributed AI taught you about life?
Oh, uh, gosh, probably everything we've discussed, how
Right, yeah. Fair play.
how the centralization, it has a place because you have to compress that data down. The decentralization is just as important, and you have to always be pushing for that. I don't know. There's just so many things. Um, yeah.
In my travels of research on you, I found years ago that you'd posted a question and answer session on Quora. I think that's how you say it.
Oh, yeah. I used to
Uh,
do it.
here
Yeah.
we go.
I went through a phase.
It's like I will help you. Here, no, we need people like yourself answering these questions because That the amount of times I've seen that in like a thread, either on like Reddit or Quora or like maybe Yahoo answers,
Yeah.
and someone comes along and answers a question. It's like, thank you, because you're like the only one who did, right?
Right. Right.
And this was when I found out I was intrigued and I wanted you to share it here. What is an attention network and why is it beneficial to society?
An attention. Oh, gosh, that was a long time ago. Um, can you give me a brief overview of the answer from your
Oh
perspective?
my God, I don't know. I don't know. Oh
Well,
gosh,
I will say
I
this.
go to you for the answers, my friend.
So for Quora, I went through a phase like a few year long phase where I'd answer a few questions a day. It was just a little thing I did.
Oh, cool.
And but I was going through this phase where I was kind of trying to understand the world, right? It was a phase where I was in like an atom mode and being like, oh, that is an interesting question. I'd like to think about it, and then I'll answer it. So I was doing that for a little while, kind of fun. This question, I got to a point where I was considering attention and trying to see the world as attention. Like I've just mentioned how I kind of see the world as language. Um, but if you think about attention, it where your attention goes kind of determines how everything will change and evolve. And so it kind of seems like managing attention is the primary thing if you want to for anything, right? For it's the primary thing that an intelligent system has to do to be intelligent, essentially, has to manage its attention appropriate to its, goals and its environment. And so I don't exactly remember the answer that I gave on that, but I know it has something to do with that kind of principle. So I guess that's all I can say at this point. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing, man. Couple of final questions for you. Now it's easier stuff, but it's more philosophical stuff.
Cool.
Um, Actually, one more. There was one thing actually before I get into that. You have a great voice.
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
just wondering, have you ever used it for like voiceovers or like audiobooks or something like that? It's quite like I'm sure my listeners will agree. It's quite a soothing voice. I'm just
I've never
curious.
used it. People have told me that before.
There we go.
I've I've always been skeptical because I don't feel like it's great. But if other people do, then I love that. That's wonderful.
There you go. There's another avenue for you.
All
Voiceovers and
right. A
audiobooks.
backup. All
Right
right.
on. There you
Love
go. There you go. What is the best advice you've ever received?
it. I think I could probably come up with the answer for that if I give it a little thought. Um, gosh. Oh man. Well, let me give you two books that I really like. And maybe the best advice that I've ever received might be in one of these books. Um, I don't know. We'll see. So the first one is the Tao Te Ching. I really like that one. Listen to it, every once in a while. It's short. It's, but I think it's my favorite kind of religious kind of book. It's religious and philosophical, and it's about the art of living. If anybody doesn't know, it's wild. It's a wild book. So I think that one's got a lot of good advice. And another one that I read about once a decade, I've come back to it, I've found, um, is kind of an obscure book. I mean, it's not like popular. It's not like How to Win Friends or anything, but it's what is it called? Bonds That Make Us Free. Bonds That Make Us Free. And that book is very interesting because it's all about your relationships with other people. And and okay, this is probably the best advice that I've ever had. Is from this book. And the main premise of this book, just outline it real quickly. It just says, look, when you're interacting with people, and I think you could extrapolate this to the whole world, but when you're interacting with people you know, you can internally view them as a thing to, get something from, an it, you know, something that I have to control, maybe. Um, and this is subconscious, like this is good advice because if you keep this in mind, you'll notice when you kind of do this and you'll say, oh, I could change that now that I noticed it. So you can see them as that, or you can see them as a human that has an experience that's just as complex as yours and all that, right? And so this is obvious stuff, but reading the book kind of hounds it in exactly what happens when you see them as an it, and how do you know you're seeing them as an it, and kind of goes into that. Um, and it's very eye-opening because it's got lots of layers and it's very deep. So anyway, I guess that would be my the best advice I've ever received.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's like it's funny how rewarding it is sometimes to, especially like to do things like helping people or to just like go out of your way for no reason. The amount of times I've done that and then someone's turned around and been like, "Why?" And I'm like, I don't know, because it's the
Mhm.
right thing to do, or
Yeah,
just cause. And it
yeah,
feels good and it's right, but it's also just like you said, it's a different way of interacting with people in the world. Like it, honestly, you get so much more out of it. And yeah, like once you start picking up on your own behaviors, because you can't control other people, you just can't. But you
right.
can
You can barely
control you.
control yourself.
Well, see, here's the thing. You're wrong about that. You
Oh
can.
yeah,
But yeah, but it's discipline though, isn't it?
yeah, it is. It's
Like
hard.
I said this to someone today that like everything comes down to choice in life.
Mm.
Everything. Do I choose to be a good person or a bad person? Do I choose to be lazy or hardworking? Do I choose to be
Yes,
positive or negative? Do I choose to love or hate? Do I choose to go left or right? Like, and all of those decisions shape who you are, where you go, what you do, everything. It shapes your
that's right.
entire reality.
Yeah, yeah. Everything flows from it. And so I've noticed. I mean, taking it back to these two books and how they're interconnected for me. So I've noticed that if you treat people as people, you kind of do what the Tao Te Ching suggests, which is letting things go their own way, I guess is probably my takeaway from that book. And you realize, oh, I don't have to control you, like I don't have to, it's fine. You do that. If you want to do that, I'm okay with it.
That's the crazy thing about it as well. If you choose to let go, it almost like it frees you. I know how like hippie this might sound to some people, but it does free you. Like I did that a few years back. I stopped caring or being worried about things that were out of my control. It's like, right, what can I do? I can
Right,
control how I treat other people. I can control how hard I work on a given day. Like people have asked me that before, like, why do you work so hard? You know, why come home after a long day at work and then immediately start working on these creative things, right? And obviously there's reasons for that. Like I have goals, I want to change my life, I want to do this, that, and the other. But a lot of it also comes down to like self-fulfillment and feeling like you've achieved something.
yes,
Like building. Humans, we need to build things. This is why, like, sometimes you go on holiday and like you're there for like a week and you start getting itchy feet and you want to get back to just doing stuff. Why? Because
yes,
we need to build, we need to create. If we sit around doing nothing, we get bored and we get destructive. And then that's where that human impulsion to destroy oneself comes from. That's
that's
why you
right.
see these like rich, super rich people, out of touch people that just start destroying everything. Why? Because they're bored. They're not building anything.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. What's the biggest life lesson you've learned so far?
Life lesson. Oh gosh, these are big questions.
There you go, man.
I,
Bringing out the big boys.
life lesson. I don't know. I don't know. Some stuff I've been thinking about lately is about managing complexity because we just launched and my world's complex. So, uh, managing that complexity has been kind of on my mind lately, but I don't know if that's a life lesson. I don't know. Um, I can say though, your comment about everything is choice. There's something about that. I 100% agree. And I also 100% disagree
Ooh.
because from two different perspectives, and also like maybe two different levels. Um, and I think the world is this way. It's fundamentally a paradox. So I think having conflicting ideas like this is totally accurate since it's a paradox anyway. So, but let me describe what I mean. When I was in about third grade, I I watched a lot of like Bill Nye, like I was into science and stuff. And I kind of was thinking one day, and I kind of noticed that people, adults mostly, could take one piece of information and then they could take another one that seemed completely unrelated to me. And, because I'm a kid and I don't know anything. But they could take these two pieces of information and they could draw a conclusion from those two and learn something new. And I would be like, how in the world do you do that? So I was trying to like figure out like how do people do logical reasoning or, deduction or all these words I didn't know yet. I was like, how do they do it? And so I started thinking about that pretty deeply. And of course, at that age, the only word I had was like think. How do you think? Right? Like that was just thinking to me, doing the calculations. Like, what is the algorithm to think? And I started wondering that for quite a while. And I realized, well, I don't know because it seems like other people can, in order to think, in order to make those conclusions or whatever, they're in control of their thinking process. And I didn't feel like I was in control of my thinking process. I was just watching it all the time. And thoughts would pop up and I would be like, okay. And then another thought would pop up because that first one did. And I'd be able to trace it back a little bit and be like, okay, well, that's why that came. Anyway, long story short, I got into this kind of existentialist quandary and thinking like, I might be the only human on earth that doesn't know how to think, that's not in control of their thoughts. It doesn't have this fundamental control. And I felt like Pinocchio, like I felt like I wasn't real and like everybody else was. And and I thought, I basically have two options here. I can keep quiet about this and just be weird. I mean, assuming that everybody else is in control of their thoughts and I'm the only one that's not. Or I can ask somebody about it. And if I ask somebody about it, uh, they'll either say, you're not in control of your thoughts. That's wild. Or they'll say, here's how you do it. And so I thought, oh, I'll take the risk, you know. Um, and so I asked somebody, and I was like, I just said, how do you think? How do you think, And they said, in order to think, in order to come up with that question, you had to think. And then I realized that they had not gone through this entire realization process that I had been through, and they just didn't know that they're not in control of their fundamentally of anything. And so I kind of have always lived with this realization that that's a fundamental truth. And I believe it's opposite, this choice that you brought up. I don't believe it's in competition with that truth. I think it actually does exist as a fundamental truth alongside because I believe the universe is a paradox, but I believe that they're both 100% accurate.
So I'm into like a lot of like spiritual stuff. I think because when you have conversations like this, at some point it comes down to what you believe in, how, for instance, you interpret the universe, you interpret the things around you, and there are no rights or wrongs because none of us know for certain. But I love talking about it.
Yeah, me too.
But someone said to me a few years ago that like all these things that you have, these talents, these understandings of the world, whatever, like they're gifts, right? Like for example, I do acting, I do music, I do
Oh, cool.
podcasts, this sort of stuff, right? So I've established the thread that binds them all is this ability to generate ideas. And it pertains to all things. So like when I work like day job stuff doing like say hospitality and I'm thinking out how to lay a room, I'm like, maybe it would make more sense for this to go here. And, there's logic reasoning there. It's like, oh, well, there's less space here, but it's also how something feels, how it looks.
Yeah.
And not all
Yeah.
of that comes down to logic. Some of that comes down to how you feel about things. And to further expand on what you're saying, like, it's interesting because thoughts come and go, right? They're relative. To say that someone or humans are not in control of themselves is a fascinating concept because I don't know, to my mind, like certain human beings are, and certain human beings are not, and that's down to training and discipline and understanding of oneself and place within the world. Because you've got many people that consume and destroy and whatever, like they don't think about why we're here, the bigger picture. What's my influence? What does it matter? What does it not matter? And don't get me wrong, again, I know there's people out there that, they're just like, hey, we're just here to have a good time and that's it. And it could be that. I
Sure.
think about that. Sometimes I think about like, hey, maybe everything is pointless and I need to stop worrying and just have a beer. And other times it's like, no, there's got to be more. There's got to be a reason. Because why? Because why? And it's
Right.
like, I
Yeah.
feel like for individuals like us, it's like, you know, and for everyone listening, it's that question of why that drives us, that keeps us going. Because it's like,
Yeah.
what is the point? I'll never
Yeah.
know if I don't keep questioning. And that, in essence, I think is, I mean, it can drive you nuts sometimes thinking about it, right? But also, when you talk about this idea of not being able to think, I think some of that comes down to like how you've been conditioned, where you grow up, who you're surrounded by. For
Yeah.
example, let's say you come up with a thought, or like when you were a kid, you came up with some thoughts, and someone turned around and went, "That's stupid,"
Right.
and then you keep hearing that, and you're like, "Oh, well, maybe I should just shut up. Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe my thoughts mean nothing." But then if
Right.
you have people that give you positive reinforcement, like, "Oh, that's a great idea," or "Yeah, you should do that," or whatever. Like I spoke to someone at work today, and I was telling them to chase their dreams and like why they should do that, and like this idea of taking baby steps to achieve that. And like, I gave an example like, hey, well, why don't you just go along to say like a networking event and just see how it feels? See what you think about it. See
Right.
how, get inspired by other people and then think about like, okay, well, how would this apply to me and how I feel about things and what I do? And I guess her eyes like widening, like, just, yeah, maybe I should do that.
Cool.
And it's cool thinking about that and how because when I think about myself, there was a time when I was very negative, when I would dismiss my own thoughts, dismiss my own abilities, and now in a weird kind of way I feel indestructible, even though I feel like my influence is nothing and nothing goes anywhere, but it does. Maybe on a small scale, but it does. Like people have reached out and been like, "Hey, I love this podcast," or "Hey, this stuff got me through a hard time," or "Hey, I love you,"
Oh,
or whatever. Like, and I
that's
start to
cool.
realize, like, okay, this idea that you think you have no influence, you think you have no power, that changes through your experiences over time. Like, for instance, you're building this technology, right? And that begun from a thought, from an idea. And like one day you just sat down and you thought, well, what about if we would do this distributed AI? Like, what if we would build this? And what if we could like get some people together and start expanding on this? And what if we could do this? And what if we could do that? And slowly but surely that dream then becomes an idea, then becomes a real thing, and now you're doing it.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
then 5, 10 years passes and now it becomes bigger than you ever could have imagined. And this is something that this is why I do this podcast, because it's now bigger than myself. And I feel like
Wow.
anytime you get to a point in your life where you start to build something bigger than yourself, that's when you start tapping into something deeper and where your thoughts maybe start to really transform into something magical.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because we're all trying to find a way to serve the world. It kind of feels like that. And we're all unique. So we bring something to the table and we're trying to find, even if we don't know that we're trying to find this, I think we all are, that we're trying to find a way to serve other people that is our own way, that is something that we can do that other, that it's just right for us. Um, yeah, I kind of feel like everybody's trying to search for that. Yeah.
See, you say that, but there are people I know, people I've met, people I see every day that just aren't.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that comes down to what I did mentioned before about fostering a positive environment, or maybe it's an intelligence thing, or who knows, man? It could be anything. But like,
You think they're
well,
just distracted? I mean, we're so distracted by our phones and like those people, particularly that you know. Do you think it's maybe just a distraction thing?
no, I think it's a realization thing.
Oh.
I think that the amount of times I've met someone, because I'm 31
Hmm.
and tend to work with a lot of people that are younger than me. Just you get it, hospitality attracts a lot of students. You get a lot of people like that. I'm doing it because it's flexible. It gets me to do what I'm doing, try to build other things, so it's useful. But I meet a lot of people, and you got some kids that are really like pushing it. They're at uni, they're building this thing, they're trying to do it, and they're like grinding just as hard as me. And I'm like, yeah, more power to you. And then you got someone who, they'll say something like this. They'll be like, they'll ask me about me, and then I'll be like, oh, well, how about you? What are you doing? And they're like, oh, well, I thought about doing this, but yeah, I don't know. And I'm
Uh,
like, why don't you do it? And they're like, it probably wouldn't work. And I'm like, but what if it would work?
yeah.
What if you try this? Or what about this? And it's like I mentioned before, the eye is opening that you're like, oh yeah, well, you think I could do it? Yeah, I think you have the ability. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing. A lot of human beings haven't necessarily had that conversation with someone else or had that
Yeah.
realization that, hey, I could do this, or this is possible. Or, you get, it's like the way the world exists. Like, let's take celebrities as an example, right? For some strange reason, we view celebrities as being like really special and magical. And maybe it's because of the way they make us feel. Like if it's an actor, you saw them in a movie and they made you feel like special, or,
Hmm.
you know, you fell in love with an idea, or a character they played, or something, right? It was magic. And you maybe
Yeah.
you see them in real life and you're like, wow. And, it's just a person, but to you, it feels magical, like a dream. It brings you back to a sense of innocence that you had when you were a child, when like everything seemed possible. And we tend to lose that as we get older, and people that aren't happy joke about it, and they go, welcome to adulthood, responsibilities, and
Right.
you have to
Right.
just accept that things are shit.
Right.
And I never could accept that. I could never accept this idea that, oh, you get older and that's it, things are over. And I
That's
just,
depressing.
right. And so
Yeah.
you got to, this is why I always push people to chase their dreams, because it's like there has to be something bigger. And you can do it. Everyone can do it. Everyone listening to this show, whatever you believe about yourself, whatever you're doing in life, you can do so much more than you realize. And so much of it comes down to believing in oneself and looking at the thoughts that you have and going, what if I would try this? What
Right.
about this? Like everything is possible. It just comes down to like, are you willing to put the time in to explore, to try, to see? And like, I'm not saying that everything's going to work out just because you try.
Right.
Believe me, I learned that lesson. But like, something will. You put enough time and effort into something or anything in life, something's going to work out, and that one thing could change your life, or it
That's
could.
right. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It could bring you happiness that you never envisioned, or it could change you. Like for me, chasing my dreams has transformed me as a person,
Wow.
like completely.
That's
Like
awesome. Like
right,
more positive.
definitely, but like more than that, it's given me like a sense of strength
Oh, cool.
that wasn't there before. You
Yeah.
know, and like when I look at the idea of anyone working on anything, either building themselves in the gym or building a house or working on a distributed AI network, or you know, it's
Yeah.
like amazing. You're building things, as you mentioned earlier, to contribute to the world in some shape or form, hopefully in a positive way that will change the way we live for the better. And
Right.
that can never be a bad thing.
No, it can't. And uh I recently discovered the Mountain Goats. Have you heard of them? It's just a
Band?
silly band. I love them.
Cool.
It's
Check it
really
out.
good. Uh, but he has a line in one of his songs that says, "When you know, well, how does it go? When you know you're never going to make it out alive, you kind of get to live out your dream." And he's got a lot of kind of like one-liners like that that I just love. Anyway, but I think a lot of people haven't realized that, okay, so that they go through this phase where they realize, okay, yeah, everything's shit. We're all going to die. And then they stop. And it's like, there's more, like, well, then what are you going to do while you're here? I mean, you might as well do something. And you might as well do something that you think matters and that you kind of maybe enjoy a little bit. So I think that there's a conclusion from that that people just kind of ignore. They just get depressed and then they're like, that's it. We're all just going to die and who cares?
I do understand this, but at the same time, like I look at it like, okay, we're all gonna die, but we're here,
Yeah.
we exist, we're alive,
Yeah.
and we don't know how long we're alive for. So maybe we should focus on trying to make that as positive and rewarding experience as possible. And that's the amazing thing about us. All of these human beings is we're all talented in different ways. You know, we all have something a little different to offer. Like someone said this to me years ago. Everyone knows something that you don't know.
Yeah.
I always just blew my mind to think about like everyone has something to bring to the table. The amount of times I've been in a group project or worked in a team, and you know, it's quite clear that someone feels insecure about themselves, and you know, they push themselves to one side, and maybe the rest of the group even acknowledges, "Oh, this person, who cares?" And I've always tried to kind of like bring everyone in and be like, "Right, okay, we can all do something here. What are you good at? What are you good at? What do you like doing? You know, oh, you want to
Oh,
try
that's awesome.
something? Like, let's try it. Let's do it. You know,
Yeah. You're like a
like
natural leader, natural inspirer. You bring everybody.
oh, no, I hate
I
being a
think
leader.
so. Yeah.
Nah, nah. So, like, I just want people to believe in themselves because I
Yeah.
know what it feels like not to believe in yourself and how crushing that feels. And
Yeah.
it's it's magical watching someone's eyes light up like a Christmas tree when they start believing in themselves or when they start thinking about what's possible or like
Yeah.
or they just start working on something. Like I give an example. There was a guy who appeared on my podcast a few years back and he posts videos of himself. Shout out to Jexplex. How you doing? And it's just him working out. And I've seen his transformation over the course of like a year now. Built like a tank. It's amazing.
Wow.
And yeah, he's just working out. But it's just really inspiring. He's just kept up with it. And he's transforming himself every single day. And there's that discipline to keep doing it, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And it's like that right there is the driving force you need to just keep going. Because every day is different. But some days you wake up and you're like, let's do this. I'm going to do
Yeah.
everything. I'm going to change. I'm going to really just be productive. Next day you wake up and you're like, what's the point? Why am I doing this? What have I
Yeah.
achieved? I'm a failure. I'm a fraud. Da,
Right.
da, 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 da. And if anything, those days are the most important days to try.
That's right. Yeah.
And there's
And
always a,
sometimes you need to take a break and just recoup.
yeah. Oh man, I love to slack off. I mean, it's important. It's really is. I mean, because people feel guilty as well. You feel guilty about it. You think like, oh, I'm not getting stuff done. I'm slacking off. I'm doing this, that, and the other. And it's like you're not a machine. And
Yeah.
what
You're not.
happens? What happens to a machine if you keep it running for too long?
Right.
It overheats. It breaks down, and you have to fix
Yeah.
it. And we're no different.
Yeah. And if you are a machine, you can't do anything that you can't do because machines can only do what they can do.
Yeah,
And
you have to learn
so
how
if
to
you're
do
trying
it.
to, right, if you're pushing yourself beyond what you can do, then just don't do that. I mean, that's not good.
No, but then you can learn to do it.
Oh, that's true. You can increase your abilities over time. Yeah. But you got to push to do that.
Yeah, that's the challenge. I challenge all of you to keep pushing. Final question for you. Do you have any upcoming projects or final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Um, in regards to this last part of this conversation, um, my metaphysics comes down to the fact that I think the universe is a simulation of itself.
Yeah, I gathered
So,
that from what you were saying, but it's interesting.
so that means it's a paradox, and that means I grew up very religious. I grew up in uh, a Mormon household, very religious, uh, very much. And so I know the language of religion, and I have a lot of religious metaphors and stuff like that. And so I can use that language, but I don't use it the way they use it anymore, right? Because I have a different metaphysics.
Can I just
Um,
interject for a second though? Like, so you grew up in that background, but then at some point you discovered science, and that
yeah,
obviously changed. And then, so you still religious?
no.
No, okay. So at some
Mhm.
point you were like, okay, this is what I believe in, but you didn't disregard it in totally. It's just information. And
Well,
now
I
I
kind
have
of,
access to new information, information that maybe I believe in more to some extent.
yes. And to be fair, I kind of, the Mormons are a very literal people. So their religion, is very literal. And so I think other religions or other, ways of talking about these kind of concepts in the context of like using God and other kind of language like that, they some are more figurative and symbolic and trying to describe kind of our world, but in kind of religious iconography and stuff. So to be fair, um, you have to understand that I came from very, very literal upbringing in religion. And so I had to let that go because I realized, no, that's just not the right interpretation. It's if anything, you have to use this language with more symbolism. So when I
I,
kind of realized my metaphysics, that the universe is a simulation of itself and ultimately paradoxical, I can still use the religious terminology. For instance, I can still say something like, a religious person, literal religious person might say, hell is somewhere you go after this life, you know, if you were not good. And and then you look at the kind of the Eastern religions, and they have this idea of karma from life to life, or something like that. And and so they also have this kind of, okay, well, there's a logical causation between what you're doing and who you become and your experiences in the world. And I think that's more accurate than the literal interpretation of, brimstone and fire and, kind of this kind of stuff. But so I've taken it to the point where I say, what the world, you know, this is the world we live in. This is hell and this is heaven at the same time. Like this is hell.
Interesting.
So when I realize that, oh yeah, this is a bad day, I feel overwhelmed or whatever, I just kind of am like, well, welcome to hell. I mean, it's not going to get better unless you make it better. So, um,
It's almost like
yeah,
saying today is hell, tomorrow is heaven.
yeah, maybe, or like, I was listening to Baudrillard, his book, The Simulacra and the Simulation, when I was in a airport one day. And so I was sitting in the airport for like 3 hours listening to his book. And I just had this experience where I was watching people pass by me and everybody was busy or hurrying or, bothered. Nobody looked happy. There was nobody who was like, "Oh, this is great. I'm having a good day." And I was just kind of thinking about this. And so I think if you kind of put it in that kind of setting, you can say, "Look, everybody's in hell. This is hell. We're all here." And you can either make it worse, and that's a rebellion, like that impulse to destruction, like you said. It's saying, okay, I acknowledge it's hell, and because of that, I'm angry about it, and I'm gonna rebel, and I'm gonna make it worse. Or you can try to make it heaven, and if we try hard enough, long enough, we'll improve enough that it feels like heaven. So that's kind of how it feels to me. Yeah,
And what I've got you to admit there is that you agree that choice is everything.
it is. It totally is. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, man.
Yep.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. And massive thank you for agreeing to be on the show, man. It's been fascinating picking your brains about obviously this stuff like philosophy and everything, and also just like the future of distributed AI. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise and your time with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And to all the listeners of the Christian Reeve podcast, wherever you listen to the show, I hope you enjoyed it, first and foremost. Make sure if it's on YouTube, you like, share, and subscribe. Leave us a comment. I see people are leaving comments, so thank you so much. It means the world. And it really, really helps the show. I think we're slowly beginning to grow now. Slowly, we're getting there over the last 4 years. We're approaching 300. I mean, this is episode 276, which is crazy to think about. Yeah, there we go. There we go. That 300 is fast approaching. Not many podcasts can say they've got to 300, so that's the next goal. Yeah, if you listen to the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating, a review. Again, really, really helps us out. And I mentioned earlier, so this is now the third or fourth time, probably the third. You can support the show and get access to other shows that I do, bonus podcast content, and much, much more. Patreon.com/Christian Reeve. And of course, there's links in the bio. I will include a link here to Jordan Miller's work at Satori, so you can learn all about that, and also my work and everything that I do. Links are in the description as always. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. I hope you got as much as I did out of this episode. And yeah, if there's anyone that you'd like to see on the show or any topic you'd like to see, let me know. And most importantly, be safe, be well, and I'll see you in the next one.